In 2018 spring, I visited to the city of Cordoba in Spain. The goal of the visit was to give a series of talks on soils at the university. My colleague, Dr. Tom van Wollegem, who is shown in this photo, was the person who invited me over. He's a young professor, but he's already quite well known for his works on soil erosion in Mediterranean environments. His research is quite different from many others in that he pays particular attention to the history of land uses. On the first day of the visit, he gave me a tour of this beautiful city. In the 10th century, Cordoba was the largest city in Europe and was the capital of Islamic Spain. At the time, the population was about 400,000, which is larger than the current population of Minneapolis. Islamic ruling of Cordoba lasted from the 8th to the 13th century. During this period, Cordoba was a world leading center of education and philosophy. The long history is abundantly shown through the city. The Roman bridge in this slide was built in the 1st century BC, more than 2,000 years ago. The huge building behind the bridge is mezquita. Mezquita is the Spanish word for mosque. It is truly awe-inspiring building. It is considered one of the finest Islamic architecture in the world. When Christians recaptured the city in the 13th century, they built the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Assumption within the existing mosque. You will see Catholic Church sort of inserted into the vast Islamic prayer hall. Cordoba is also the hottest place in Spain and Europe in the summer. There was one reason Tom recommended me to visit the place no later than May. After my official schedule was done, Tom gave me a tour of the neighboring countryside. The trip to the countryside took me by surprise. Every direction I looked, there were endless olive farms. Hills after hills were covered by olive trees that were planted on lines and lines. I grew up in South Korea, and this was my first visit to Mediterranean countrysides. Many of you may use olive oils daily, but I had not been a huge consumer of olive oils until I heard about the health benefit of using olive oils over canola oils. I'm not a huge fan of Mediterranean food neither, so I wasn't thinking much about olive and olive farms when I was visiting Cordoba. I really should have. The landscape here have several distinct features. First, it is hilly. Hill slopes repeatedly cover the landscapes. Between hill slopes are flat plains that are often incised by streams. And these low, relatively flat plains developed between hills are either on colluvial or alluvial materials. By colluvial materials, I indicate soils and rocks that have been moved by soil erosion. By alluvial materials, I refer to sediments that have been relocated by streams. Second, the landscapes largely looked barren. Here, nothing but olive trees is visible to the end of the landscapes. Between olive trees, there was minimal presence of understory shrubs or grasses. Ground surface was mostly bare mineral soil. Much of the field was underlain by sedimentary limestone. The bright color of the soils indicates the lack of organic matter in the soils as well. Now, speaking of climate, the annual precipitation here is about 400 millimeter, which is about 200 millimeters short of what we have in Minneapolis. But here, most of the rain falls in the cool winter and spring. So by the time I visited in May, the soils had already lost much of the moisture. Third, I saw the marks of severe soil erosion everywhere. Soil erosion is the act of removing soils. Of course, there are different ways of removing soils off the ground, but water is often the dominant agent of eroding soils. This is particularly true where mineral soils are not covered by vegetation or organic matter, and thus not protected by vegetation or organic layer. Imagine you're standing here in a rainy day in winter. It is pouring, and suddenly small, ephemeral streams appear here and there, and cutting into the ground and move away dislodged mineral particles. These scars reflect real erosion. Even on relatively flat olive farms, these rills are present in high densities. They form networks of ephemeral channels. As these rills continue to cut into the ground, they eventually expose the underlying bedrock. In this case, hard sandstone has been exposed by real erosion. This photo also shows how shallow the soil is. Removing about 10 to 30 centimeters of soil expose the solid bedrock. This real erosion can expand and create substantial valleys or gullies. This gully erosion in this photo has scoured about 3 meters of limestones. Tom told me that this particular gully had been created within the last several decades. So this gully is not particularly older than you guys. Being there in May, I found it difficult to imagine what it would be like during the rainy winter days. The catchment behind this gully would collect much of the rainfall and send the water in a rapid ephemeral stream, which has strong power strong enough to cut through the soft limestone in these landscapes. I know I showed this slide earlier, but this time look at this closely and look for what dissects the flat floodplain feels. The stream in the valley was only ephemeral and was dry when I visited the place. This small canyon that continues miles and miles here is actually a gully that has been opened by severe erosion during the past century. It's only a century old. Then where do all these sediments go? They end up choking up streams. These stream beds are recent deposits of sediments eroded from the local olive farms. As the stream bed aggrades, so does the danger and likelihood of flooding. The stream bank that has been built to protect the town from the flooding. The stream bank has been built to protect the town from the flooding. The effectiveness of the bank, however, is compromised by the elevating stream bed. In addition to flooding disaster, the sediments bring overdose of nutrients and agrochemicals to fresh water, providing a serious threat to the water quality. Okay, the first thing I did when I returned from Spain was to order a fine bottle of extra virgin Spanish olive oil. This one was available from Amazon.com. 2 days after the order, the bottle was in my hand. I looked at it with a kind of awe. I felt I had been ignorant of olive farming, while it had been so important to a country like Spain, enough to bear such a severe soil erosion. The following lectures are what I have found about the land use issues of olive farming and the history behind them.